The Book of 2 Kings, fully summarized. So after the death of Ahab, Moab rebelled against Israel, and King Ahaziah of Israel was injured and bedridden. So he sent messengers to ask the god Baal-zebub what his fate would be. However, the prophet Elijah went and sent the messengers back to Ahaziah with the message that the Lord had said that Ahaziah would die if he left his bed for trusting in another deity. Ahaziah was angry when the messengers returned, so he sent 51 men to go retrieve his hairy ass. But Elijah called upon God to kill them, and so God sent down a fire from heaven, burning them all alive. Then Ahaziah sent out 51 more men, but Elijah called on God to kill them again, so they were all burned alive. Then Ahaziah sent out 51 more men, but the captain of these guys actually had a brain and begged for mercy. And so Elijah spared them and went back to Samaria to warn Ahaziah himself of his own sins and punishment. Then Ahaziah died according to God, and because he had no son, Jehoram ruled Israel in his place. Elijah knew he would die soon, and so did his follower Elisha, mostly because prophets kept reminding him, your master is going to die pretty soon, bro. So Elisha was like, okay, I know, shut up. Elisha stayed with Elijah until he died, and so he went with him to Bethel, then Jericho, then Jordan, where Elijah did a magic trick and made the waters separate, and then a chariot of fire appeared and took Elijah into heaven. Elisha grieved for his master and then took up his mantle with the double portion of his spirit having been transferred to him, so he could do cool magic tricks too. Elisha parted the Jordan River to cross just like Elijah had, and the people knew that the spirit of Elijah was in him. A veritable second coming, if you will. Elijah tarried in Jericho, but the land was barren, so he healed the waters with God powers and a pinch of salt. He then left the city and sent out some bears to kill 42 children for making fun of his baldness. Then it was just a hop, skip, and a jump to Samaria. Jehoram was now king of Israel and did some evil in the Lord's sight, not Baal-related though, finally. King Mesha of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel, so King Jehoram went to ask for the help of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. He agreed, and they allied with the king of Edom to fight against Moab, but on the way they had no water supply. So the prophet Elisha was called upon by the 3 kings. Elisha was told by the Lord that the people were to dig ditches and that they would succeed against Moab. And so they dug the ditches, and the Lord filled them with water. Israel and its allies crushed the advancing Moabite army and then invaded the land of the Moabites, slaughtering the Moabite army and destroying their cities and surrounding land. They plugged up their wells and cut down their trees as per God's scorched earth policy. The king of Edom had to offer up his oldest son as a burnt sacrifice to finally get Israel to stop slaughtering his people and leave them alone. Elisha then went on to perform many miracles, such as multiplying a widow's supply of oil so that she could pay off her debts and wouldn't have to sell her children into slavery, and allowing a barren woman in Shunem to conceive a son, to thank her for feeding him and giving him rest in her house. However, when the child had grown up, he died, so his mother traveled to see Elisha again at Mount Carmel. So Elisha went back to her house with her and raised her child from the dead by laying on him, staring into his eyes, and locking lips with him.
FBI, open up!
After that, Elisha went to Gilgal and made a pot of bad stew for the prophet, safe to eat, by adding flour during a famine. Then he multiplied the food supply to feed 100 men, and there was even some left over afterwards. In the next chapter, Naaman, the commander of the army of Syria, who was a great and honorable man in the eyes of the Lord, contracted leprosy, and he also had a young girl captured from Israel as his wife's servant. It was suggested by the Israelite girl that Naaman should go to see the prophet Elisha to be healed. So Naaman sent one of his men out to Israel to seek Elisha, and Elisha sent a message to him that he was to wash himself in the Jordan 7 times to cure his leprosy. Naaman was angry Elisha didn't just call upon the name of God and magic away the leprosy immediately, but despite his doubts, he was convinced by his servants to try it, and he was healed. Man, raising the dead, healing the sick, curing leprosy, multiplying food. Elisha really is giving Jesus a run for his money. Oh, imagine if you could get the 2 of them in the same room for a magic trick showdown.
You were the only one that was nearly as strong as me. Buddy, you think you look strong? You're just a cheap knockoff. No. I'm the upgrade.
Naaman converted to Judaism and tried to reward Elisha, but Elisha wanted no compensation, though Naaman did promise to stop sacrificing to other gods. Elisha's servant Gehazi, however, went and scammed Naaman into giving him some money and clothes. Elisha called him out on it and cursed him and all his descendants with leprosy forever. He can dish it out as well as he can take it. Then, in the next chapter, the prophets complained that their dwelling place was too small, and so they set up a swanky place by the Jordan with Elisha's permission. But when one guy was cutting down a tree for construction, his axe accidentally fell into the river. So Elisha made it float so he could retrieve it. Wow, not even Jesus could do that magic trick. Syria then prepared to attack Israel, but the king of Israel was warned by Elisha about it, who had been spoken to by God. Syria gathered intelligence that the king of Israel had gone to Dothan, so Syria ended up surrounding the city. Elisha prayed to God to make all the Syrians blind, and so God fulfilled the prayer. All the Syrians were temporarily blind, and Elisha led them away to Samaria. After having their eyesight restored, they surrendered, and surprisingly the Israelites didn't actually kill anyone. In fact, at Elisha's command, they gave the Syrians food and water and sent them on their way peacefully, and the men never again attacked Israel. He's a pacifist too? He really is Jesus 1.0. Well, I mean, he did send a bear to maul 42 children to death before, so maybe he still has some anger issues to work out. However, King Ben-Hadad still wanted to attack, so he gathered up a new host and attacked Samaria in the midst of a famine. While the king of Israel was just casually walking by in the city, a woman on the wall of Samaria told him that she was eating her children to survive, which God made happen to his own people, as he promised to. The king sent a messenger to get Elisha's help, and Elisha made a prediction about some of the commodities sold at the market. Very, very useful, Elisha. So then there were 4 leprous men standing outside the gates of Samaria, and they wanted to surrender to the Syrians to save themselves. When they came to the Syrian camp, however, to their surprise, it was empty, because the Lord had driven the Syrians out of it by spooking them with a noise. The lepers were afraid, but they stole some food and money from some of the Syrian tents. However, the lepers realized that there was a golden opportunity open to them, so they went and told the Samaritans that the camp was empty. The king was skeptical and sent a few men out to check, and after they confirmed the sitch, the Samaritans went and plundered the camp, and Elisha's market prediction came true, and a guy was trampled to death by the people at the gate for not believing in it. Then Elisha went back and spoke to the woman whose son he had risen from the dead, and told her that God would send a famine of 7 years for some reason, so she departed and dwelled in the land of the Philistines. Then, after 7 years passed, when she returned to Israel, she told the king to give her back her home. So it was restored to her after it was revealed to the king what Elisha had done for her previously. Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, was sick and sent for Elisha to ask him if he was going to die. Elisha knew that he would die, but told the messenger who came to him, Hazael, to return and lie to Ben-Hadad and say that he would live. Elisha revealed to Hazael that, gasp, the next king of Syria would be him, and he would do great evil and kill the men, women, and children of Israel. I will remind you that in the last book, God commanded Elijah to put Hazael on the throne, so, yeah.
I just love killing.
Then Hazael returned to Syria, killed Ben-Hadad, and ruled in his place. Then Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, became king of Judah, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and fought against the Edomites, who rebelled against Judah. Yet though they were victorious, the Edomites continued to rebel. Then the book completely skips over the rest of Jehoram's reign, because is it not written in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? His son Ahaziah reigned in Judah, and what a surprise, he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he went to war with Hazael, king of Syria, along with the king of Israel, Joram, but Jehoram was wounded in the battle. Meanwhile, Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, was anointed as king of Israel secretly, as commanded by Elisha. Jehu was commanded on the Lord's behalf to destroy the house of Ahab for the blood of the prophets that was shed by Ahab's wife Jezebel. The entire house was to perish, all that pissed against the wall, and Jezebel was to be eaten by the dogs and left to rot. Then Jehu conspired against Joram, king of Israel, and went to Jezreel, where his wounds were being treated. Joram's guards asked if he came in peace, but Jehu kept dodging the question, so Joram came out to personally meet him and ask, and Jehu shot him through the heart with a crossbow. Ahaziah, king of Judah, was there to witness the murder and fled, but Jehu pursued him, and he too was killed. Then Jehu went after Jezebel, and he had his allies push her off a window, killing her, and her corpse was eaten by the dogs. Then Jehu went on a total killing spree and sent letters to the great men of Israel, having them slaughter all 70 sons of Ahab in Samaria, and all their heads were collected and left in heaps at the entrance of the gate. Then Jehu killed anyone who the sons of Ahab associated with, including priests, and then Jehu went and killed all of King Ahaziah's 42 brothers, and then Jehu, still not satisfied, wanted to further show off his zealous loyalty to God, and went to kill all the people who still remained loyal to Ahab in Samaria, as God wanted. Then he gathered up all the people to have them call up the worshippers of Baal, because Jehu said that he would now worship Baal.
It's a trap!
So all the followers of Baal were gathered together in one place and slaughtered on the command of Jehu, according to the Lord. Then the temple of Baal was utterly destroyed along with everyone in it, and so God was pleased with Jehu and told him that his sons would sit on the throne. But Jehu still did some evil in the sight of the Lord and preserved the golden calves in the land. In those days the Lord began cutting off parts of Israel, and Syria was taking them. And after Jehu died, his son Jehoahaz reigned in Israel. And the rest of Jehu's kingship, well, is it not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? In the next chapter, Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, realized her son was dead and did a power grab and killed off all the heirs and took the throne for herself. But she failed to kill one of his sons named Joash, who was stolen away by Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram. He was hidden in the house of the Lord for 6 years, and then on the 7th, Jehoiada, the priest, gathered bodyguards to protect Joash while he was secretly crowned as the king of Judah in the temple. Athaliah heard the noise of the people cheering for the new king and came to the temple. She was so enraged at the treason that she tore off her clothes, as you do in ancient Israel when emotions are high. But Jehoiada, the priest, commanded that the guards were to take her and her supporters out of the temple, and they were to be executed. So it was done, and then the people went and destroyed the temple of Baal and killed Matan the priest of Baal. The people then rejoiced in the killing of Athaliah, and the land was at peace. Joash, now called Jehoash, became king and did what was right in the sight of the Lord with the guidance of priest Jehoiada. But those damn high places still remained. Ah, the bastards! He tried to set apart money for the reconstruction of the temple in Judah, but it didn't really work out, as after 23 years the repairs were still not complete. So priest Jehoiada made a collection box to pay the workers who were still doing the repairs. And I guess it was eventually completed. The chapter doesn't make that clear, but it didn't have the same shiny objects that it used to. Syria then threatened to attack Jerusalem, so Jehoash had to give them the riches of Judah for peace. Then Jehoash was killed due to a conspiracy involving his servants, and his son Amaziah was crowned. In the next chapter, we return to Israel with Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, becoming king in Samaria and doing evil in the sight of the Lord. Because the Lord was super angry at Israel, he delivered them into the hands of Syria like he promised. So Jehoahaz pleaded with God to save them. God saw that Israel was oppressed, and he remembered that he was actually supposed to look after them, and so they became not oppressed anymore and returned to their land, but the army of Israel had been decimated. And the rest of the acts of King Jehoahaz, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Then his son Joash, not to be confused with the other Joash in Judah, reigned, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord and fought against Amaziah, king of Judah. And the rest of the acts of King Joash, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Then the prophet Elisha kicked the bucket, but before he did, Joash, king of Israel, came and wept for him, and he made Joash promise he would destroy the Syrians. He also told Joash to shoot an arrow out of the window and hit the ground with an arrow, but he didn't hit the ground with an arrow enough times, so because of that, Israel would only partially destroy Syria. Ah, shucks. Also, after a corpse was thrown onto Elisha's bones during a Moabite invasion, the guy rose from the dead. Ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself. Then, during the reign of Joash, now called Jehoash, Israel recaptured their lands from Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, after his father, Hazael, had died. Can this book please stop jumping around the timeline, skipping ahead, and cutting back? It gets very hard to follow, especially when multiple different kings have the same name. In the next chapter, we cut back to Judah with King Amaziah reigning, and he did right by the Lord, but the high places were still not taken down. Goodness. He executed the servants who had murdered his father, but didn't kill their children, because the law said that children should not be punished for the sins of their fathers. Wait, what? That completely contradicts multiple parts of 1 and 2 Kings. Then he killed 10,000 Edomites, and then he faced Israel in battle. But Judah got its ass kicked, and the people fled. The wall of Jerusalem was broken down, and King Jehoash stole all of the loot there, took hostages, and then the rest of his kingship is skipped over, because is it not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Ahaziah died from a conspiracy, and so the people of Judah selected his son Azariah as king. Also, the new king of Israel, Jeroboam II, son of Jehoash, did some evil in the sight of the Lord. But even though he was evil, God still used him to restore some territory, and then he died and was replaced by his son Zechariah, and the rest of his kingship, well, is it not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? The author really isn't putting much effort into these stories, huh? So, in the next chapter, we cut back to King Azariah ruling in Judah, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, but he still didn't remove the damn high places! Hashtag God hates elevation. God was fed up that the high ground still hadn't been torn down, so he was like, you underestimate my power. And God cursed Azariah to be a leper for the rest of his life. Then he died, and his son Jotham ruled, and the rest of his kingship, is it not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Going back to the king of Israel, Zechariah was ruling the land and did evil in the sight of the Lord, but he was killed by a conspiracy, and his murderer Shallum ruled in his place. And the rest of his kingship, is it not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Yes, it is. You know what? I'm just going to stop saying that now. We get it, Bible. We'll get to Chronicles when we get to it. Then Menahem killed Shallum and reigned in his place. Then Menahem attacked Tipshah for not accepting him and had a bunch of pregnant women ripped open. He did some evil in the sight of the Lord, in addition to the ripping open pregnant women, and bribed Pul, the king of Assyria, to be on his side. Then he died, and his son Pekuhiah ruled in his place, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, but he was killed by a conspiracy. His murderer Pekah ruled in his place, and he also did evil in the sight of the Lord. During his rule, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, took some hostages captive from Israel, and then King Pekah was killed by a conspiracy. His murderer Hoshea ruled in his place. Meanwhile, going back to Jotham, who was ruling Judah, he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, but the dreaded high places were still not removed. Hashtag God hates elevation. And so God started turning Israel and Syria against Judah. Jotham died, and his son Ahaz ruled. In the next chapter, King Ahaz was crowned in Judah, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, making his son pass through the fire like the heathens, burning incense on high places, and following the traditions of foreigners, angering God. Israel and Syria tried to conquer Judah, but with the help of the Assyrians, who Ahaz bribed, Ahaz was able to stop them and turn them back. Then Ahaz had a new altar constructed by Urijah the priest, based off the design of the one in Damascus, and King Ahaz instituted mandatory offerings on it. Ahaz died, and then his son Hezekiah ruled in his place. In the next chapter, we return to Israel, where Hoshea was now reigning as king. But he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and during his reign, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, went to war with Israel and defeated it. Hoshea was bound in prison after it was discovered he was plotting against Shalmaneser, and so the king of Assyria besieged the land. He took the Israelites out of their land and moved them to the river of Gozan and the cities of Medes, and this punishment was deserved because of the constant sinning of Israel and the wooden images and the never-ending high places. Hashtag God hates elevation. The Lord warned them using his prophets, but no, they just had to sin against him and reject his statutes and worship other gods. The Lord had cast Israel away from his sight and abandoned them, but Judah still remained intact. For now. Then the king of Assyria wanted to get ahead of the market, so he brought people in from all over the place to lease Samaria to them, and they did not fear the Lord and worshipped other gods. So God sent lions to kill some of them, and the king of Assyria recommended for them to follow one of the priests of Israel and learn from the law of the land that God had instituted. So the peoples consulted a priest of Israel who taught them how to correctly be afraid of God, and they worshipped God but also continued to worship their own gods as well, and burned incense on the evil high places. Hashtag God hates elevation. Even these heathens, though, were more worthy of the land than God's rebellious people. Now in the next chapter we go back to Hezekiah, who was ruling in Judah. He did right by the Lord and was very faithful, and he tore down all the altars that people used for worshipping false idols, as well as the bronze serpent. And yes, those despicable high places were finally gone! Take that, elevation! Take that! You do not have the high ground! Hallelujah! He obeyed God's commands, and did not bow to Assyria, and subdued the Philistines. Then, after the Assyrians had defeated Israel, they came up against Judah. Hezekiah paid them compensation from the treasury of the Lord, and from the gold-covered structures, to have them not attack Judah. Well, hold on a minute. Wait, I thought the chapter just said he didn't submit to Assyria, whatever. But the king of Assyria sent a great army up to Jerusalem, and the commander of the force, Rabshakeh, told Judah to surrender and that God would not protect them. However, Eliakim, Shebna, and Joab of Judah came to Rabshakeh and said, "Dude, don't speak in Hebrew to us. All the people can hear. Speak in Aramaic instead." But Rabshakeh was like, "Nah, let all the people hear me, even the vagrants eating their own dung on the wall. King Hezekiah is deceiving y'all into believing you can win because all the other gods have not protected the other nations, so how is your God any different? Come join us. We got a sweet crib for you guys to stay at. I mean, it's better than dying, right?" However, Judah held strong and would not abandon God and surrender. Eliakim, Shebna, and Joab came to King Hezekiah all naked, who was concerned about the threat of Sennacherib, king of Assyria. So he put on his sackcloth after getting all naked. Why do people either tear off their clothes or fall on their faces when they get upset in the Bible? He went into the house of the Lord and sent for the prophet Isaiah for guidance. Isaiah said that the Lord would protect Judah, that Assyria would return to its own land, and the king of Assyria would die. King Sennacherib of Assyria was worried about Libnah and Ethiopia, which were warring against him, but he sent messengers to King Hezekiah of Judah, again saying it was going to be destroyed. Hezekiah prayed to the Lord and asked him to save Judah from the hand of Assyria, so that all the kingdoms would know that he was the one true God. Isaiah then called King Hezekiah and said to him that the Lord had said concerning King Sennacherib of Assyria, "You have insulted me by giving yourself credit for your successes, Assyria. For you do not know that I am the Lord who created the world and caused all things to be. It is I who am responsible for your victories. I will put a hook in your nose because of your spite against me, and I will make you go back to where you came from, and only a remnant will escape from Jerusalem. I say that I will not allow you to enter the city of David, and I will defend Jerusalem for my own sake and for the sake of my servant." Then the Lord sent an angel of death to slaughter 185,000 Assyrian troops in the dead of night. So then King Sennacherib departed from Jerusalem and was killed by his own sons. In the next chapter, King Hezekiah became sick, wept bitterly to the Lord, fearing death. The Lord had sympathy for his most loyal servant and extended his life for 15 years, and would keep Judah safe from Assyria. God told all of this to his prophet Isaiah, who told it to Hezekiah. Isaiah healed the sickness with figs, but Hezekiah wanted a sign the treatment would last. So Isaiah had God move the sun 10 degrees backwards in the sky. Then Babylonian envoys under Berodach, king of Babylon, came to Judah and started eyeing the king's treasure, which he was showing off to them. It was prophesied by Isaiah that Babylon would eventually steal everything from the tribe of Judah, and they would also steal away some of Hezekiah's descendants and chop their dicks off. So Hezekiah was like, not my problem. I'm doing pretty good right now. Hezekiah then died, and his son Manasseh ruled in his place. Manasseh did much evil in the sight of the Lord and created altars to Baal and rebuilt the high places. Elevation will never cease! He worshipped false gods and sacrificed his son in fire. He also made a lot of wooden images. Stupid wooden images. Nobody likes you. And Manasseh seduced the people into following in his wicked ways. The Lord promised to bring calamity upon Jerusalem and Judah, and to wipe it off the map, forsaking the remnant of his people as plunder to their enemies because of their evil. Then Manasseh died after that, and his son, Amon, the blood-bending leader of the Equalists, the king of Judah, reigned in Jerusalem. And he also did evil in the Lord's sight and worshipped false idols. He was killed by his servants, but his servants were then executed by the people, and then his son Josiah reigned. Josiah did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and was very faithful to him. Josiah put money towards the reconstruction of the Holy Temple, and in the 18th year of his kingship, the high priest Hilkiah found the book of the law in the house of the Lord, and gave it to Shaphan, the scribe, who read it before the king. King Josiah was so moved he tore off his clothes, and became concerned because it was clear that the people of Judah had not been following the commands of the book. So he thought that the Lord would punish them, and he told Hilkiah the priest to get in contact with God. Hilkiah consulted a prophetess named Huldah, and she said that the Lord had spoken to her. I will bring great calamity in Israel, and my wrath will not be satisfied, because the people have rejected me and worshipped other gods. But I will spare Josiah from having to witness the destruction, because he has served me faithfully, and ripped off his clothes when he heard the word. Hilkiah brought Josiah this word, so the king gathered up the people of Judah and read to them the words of the book of the covenant at the house of the Lord. He made the people promise to follow all of God's commands as they were written, and he tried hard to restore all of Judah to worshiping the one true God, by completely destroying all the idols and shrines and worshiping places for other gods. He cast down the idolatrous priests, he tore down all the homo booths, he tore down all the dreaded high places, #GodHatesElevation. He defiled a bunch of tombs, broke down a bunch of altars, put a stop to human sacrifice to Moloch, and executed the priests of other gods, and about a page is just dedicated to listing all the stuff he got rid of, as well as him making sure that the people kept the Passover. But that page was printed in vain because God still had anger for Judah because of Manasseh's actions, in spite of how amazing and loyal Josiah was to him. His wrath still burned against Judah, and he would do to it what he did to Israel. Then Josiah died in battle against the Pharaoh of Egypt at Megiddo, and his son Jehoahaz reigned and did evil in the sight of the Lord. Jehoahaz was imprisoned quite soon after being crowned, and was killed by Pharaoh Necho like his father, who imposed a tribute upon the land of Judah. Jehoahaz's brother Eliakim, whose name Pharaoh changed to Jehoiakim, reigned and gave proper tribute to the Pharaoh, but he too did evil in the sight of the Lord. Finally, the Lord said, I have had it with these idolatrous Israelites in this idolatrous land, and made good on his promise, and sent all kinds of enemies to overwhelm and destroy Judah for the sins of Manasseh. Babylon, Chaldees, Syrians, Moabites, Ammon. Judah was even more wicked than all these nations. Jehoiakim died, and his son Jehoiachin ruled. Egypt was no longer ruling over Judah, as Babylon came up and kicked Egypt's ass, and stole its territory. King Jehoiachin did evil in the sight of the Lord, and at the time of his rule, the people of Babylon came up against Judah and besieged the city. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took Jehoiachin and those close to him under captivity. Then Nebuchadnezzar looted all the treasure out of Jerusalem and took out a bunch more people, leaving only the poorest remaining in the city. He instituted his uncle Metaniah as the king of Judah and changed his name to Zedekiah. And Zedekiah did evil in the sight of the Lord. God still wasn't satisfied that Judah wasn't totally destroyed, so he had King Zedekiah rebel against Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar was like, what the hell, man? I was the one who gave you your position in the first place. And he attacked Judah and surrounded the city of Jerusalem, starving them out, and they eventually broke through the walls. King Zedekiah tried to escape, but the Chaldeans pursued him and captured him, and killed his sons in front of him, and then plucked out his eyes, and he was taken up to Babylon after his army was scattered. Babylon went in and burned Jerusalem to the ground, and with the help of the Chaldeans broke down the walls. Pretty much everything belonging to the tribe of Judah was taken by the Chaldeans, and only a few poor people were left remaining in Jerusalem after the rest were taken away. The king of Babylon killed those closest to King Zedekiah, and then put in a puppet governor of Judah called Gedaliah, son of Ahikam. He was then assassinated by Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, and 10 people who were with him, and then the remnants of Judah fled to Egypt in fear. Then the old king of Judah, Jehoiachin, was released from prison by the new king of Babylon, Evil Merodach. No, really, that is his actual name. Despite having evil in his name, though, he was actually a pretty cool dude and gave Jehoiachin a prominent position and made sure he was fed and cared for in Babylon. The end. Will Israel and Judah be freed from their oppression at the hands of Babylon? Find out, 3 books from now, because before getting on to the actual story, we have to get through the Chronicles 1 and 2. I can't wait. Those books are so good and not painfully dull and tedious at all.